Welcome to this event. It's an incredible honor to be here with all of you. And I hope to talk a little bit today about yoga and specifically about the way in which self-enquiry fits into yoga. When you talk about yoga, there is this whole world out there of all types and schools of yoga. But traditionally, when we talk about yoga, we are talking about these particular modalities and paths. So when we talk about bhakti yoga, it is the path of devotion and the engagement with the tradition of yoga through the path of the heart. Karma yoga is the path of action. Mantra yoga is the path of sound. Yantra yoga is the path of sacred geometry and form. Tantra yoga is a specific path of yoga that utilizes many different modalities. Tantra means the weaving of all of these modalities together into a perfected instrument for yoga. Dhyana yoga is a path of meditation, and Raja yoga is the eight-limbed path that many of you may be familiar with, that includes many of these modalities, includes the asanas or the practice, the physical practices, the breath practices, and so on and so forth. They are all included in that. Now, many of these aspects of Raja Yoga are also included in other forms or paths, or the many different ways in which yoga is practiced. Now, one way or the other, yoga should lead, ideally, to jnana. Jnana means knowledge. Knowledge of what, you might ask? The knowledge of the self. Self as in, who am I? What am I doing here? Like, what is all this? How was I put into this matrix? That is the path of jnana yoga. And one way or the other, all of these different divergent, seemingly divergent paths of yoga, schools of yoga, will lead, ideally, to jnana. Now, this begs the question of what is the purpose of yoga really? Like, why are we even in this multi-billion-dollar industry that has taken the world by storm in the past few decades? What is the purpose of yoga? The whole system and the tradition of yoga has come to be in order to understand the meaning of who or what am I? What is my purpose here? What am I doing here? What even is this thing that I call I? So who I am is what decides everything else. Who I take myself to be is what determines what I manifest in my life. How I feel, how I think, how I speak, how I interact, how I am in the world, how I do anything that I do, how I perceive the world the way it is. In other words, what I am is what decides everything else. Now, what is this everything else? Everything else is your relationships, your purpose in life, the accruement of wealth or resources, how we enjoy life, how we engage with the experiences of life. And in other words, who I am, what I take myself to be, is what determines my destiny. Okay, so the I is the most important thing. And the ancient teachings of yoga discovered that this is the case, that who I am determines everything else. So let me go and find that. And not only find that, but transform that into what I really am. So that has been the quest of yoga regardless of which path within yoga or which particular branch of yoga we go into, the purpose remains the same, which is to discover who I am. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are considered to be the manual of yoga, at least most traditional yoga schools. And the most famous verse or sutra of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is the second one, which says, Yogaschitta Vritti Nirodha. Yogaschitta Vritti Nirodha. What is yoga? And Patanjali, right off the bat, he defines it as yoga is a cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. So vritti is what? Vritti means fluctuation. So when the vrittis of the mind, the fluctuations of the mind settle down, when not only do they settle down, but they cease to be entirely, that is when the state of yoga is achieved. And there are many different types of vrittis, which are pramana, viparya, vikalpa, nidra, smriti, all these different types of mental fluctuations or conditionings that seem to be covering up this state of yoga. The state of yoga that one can attain is the understanding or the knowledge of the I. In other words, the highest thing that we can achieve in yoga, the highest thing that we would want in yoga, in fact, the only thing we would want in yoga is to understand the I. And the chitta, the mental fluctuations or the fluctuations of the mind that are part of our being, that make up who we think we are, determine how we see the world. So we take in the world through the sense organs that are in Sanskrit called jnanendriyas, and we interact with the world through our organs of actions, which are called karmendriyas. So the way we interact with the world, the way we perceive the world as well as interact with the world, are determined by our vrittis, which is why Patanjali says the cessation of the vrittis is yoga. That is yoga. Now, neuroscience has a lot to say about vrittis. So if we look at the way neuroscience defines the evolution of the human brain, the triune brain theory is one such theory, where there are parts of the brain that are added on to evolutionarily lower parts of the brain. So we have the earliest part of the brain is the reptilian brain, which is made up of the brainstem, the hypothalamus, which control the physiological functions of the body. So they are responsible for the immune functions, the hormonal functions, and instinct. So the reptilian brain was the first to develop, and then to that was added the mammalian brain. So the way the brain developed over millions of years is that when one part of the brain developed on top of the other, the previous part of the brain didn't just disappear. It remained there and more layers were added to it. So the mammalian brain was added to the reptilian brain, and the mammalian brain is responsible, it's the limbic system. So it is the response to experience, and it's the mammalian brain that gives the ability to form social orders, to form herds and groups. And as soon as there is a herd and a group, there is naturally the formation of social dominance, the need for contact, the need for competition, and parental attachment so that the next generation of the species can survive and thrive. So all of our hormonal pathways, all these different pathways that influence the brain and the neural pathways that make us do what we do with regard to our social order and our social standing in the world, and what we want to achieve, what we want to give up and how we want to live our lives, and now what we want to do with our children, they all come from the limbic system. Now, the limbic system, because it is driven by emotions and this response to experience, is necessarily dualistic, as in it will fluctuate between right and wrong, black and white, this and that, me and the other, us and them, and all of these divisions, because it is the nature of the limbic system to create the social order, to create the social dominance, and so on, that we see rampant within our social structures, within our communities, and the world at large. The primate brain, or the neocortex, was the last to come on. And the brain is still evolving. And so there are newer parts that are more and more online now. The neocortex is responsible for solving complex problems. It's responsible for executive functions, for abstract thought, to be able to solve mathematical problems, to think in terms of what doesn't actually exist, what exists only in imagination, and to be able to create and visualize worlds and situations that don't actually exist. So the neocortex is this incredible, beautiful addition to the brain that, when fully developed, can not just override the limbic system and the reptilian brain, but actually it can subsume it and inform the limbic system and the reptilian brain. So the neocortex is the last one to have developed compared to the reptilian brain and the mammalian brain. Now, what we know from neuroscience and from psychology is that what we do and how we do those things are really dependent on our early childhood experience. So in our very early childhood, say up to the age of 2 or so, we are nonverbal. You know this, right? We don't really have an ability to express, because language hasn't developed yet. We don't really have the ability to express, or even to ourselves, what is happening to us. And we could have all these early childhood experiences, and necessarily they're traumatic. Even when there is no obvious trauma, or what we may consider trauma, if your mom just left you in your crib and went to take a shower and you were crying for 5 minutes, that could be traumatic. So in that experience of life, which is universal, we all experience trauma to some degree, one way or the other. But because we don't yet have language for it, this is registered by the limbic system and by the hormones that are produced in that situation as being safe or unsafe. And so what happens in this case is, because we have no way to understand me and the other in terms of language, we take it very personally. Because their language hasn't developed yet, we don't have the ability to kind of differentiate what is happening to us, whether it was my fault, not my fault, is it my problem, not my problem. We have no ability to say that or to even understand it. And so what we do is we take it all to mean something about me, and that this is either safe or this is not safe. And so what happens is, when we take all this to mean about me, that accumulates as vrittis. These are the vrittis that Patanjali is talking about. Now, these vrittis will decide all the choices that we make moving forward. So the choices that we make will be made depending on whether they feel safe or unsafe, based on these early childhood experiences, which now, by the way, because there is no language, they have become unconscious, they have become repressed, but yet they drive all our choices. So we keep making choices that feel safe. We keep rejecting choices that feel unsafe. We keep creating these situations for ourselves, and these situations are reinforced again and again by the same neural and hormonal pathways. because of course we want to be safe. There is no question about that. And in that sense, this becomes like a cyclical thing. So we create more trauma or more of these pathways to remain safe, or the fear of being unsafe, and that will inform our choices, and we keep making those choices. And this is all happening in the subconscious mind, which makes up about 90% of the mind. So about 90% of our mind, or maybe a little less, is made up of the subconscious part where this whole thing is going on in a very simplistic way. Of course, it's a little more complex, but I'm just simplifying it. On the other hand, a part of the brain that is conscious is trying to make conscious choices. So we make these choices. We are aware of the choices that we make, but we don't know why we are making those choices. We can explain it to some degree, but we can't really explain all of it because we don't even have access to it, because they are all repressed here. Repression means we're not aware of it. Suppression means we have consciously put it away somewhere. Repressed means it's not even available. So we keep making those choices. We keep giving explanations and justifications and reasons for why we make those choices, but we don't really know the real reason why we make those choices. So this whole thing here is known as this mass of vrittis that are deciding our I. They become our identity. They make up the I. So this is why we do what we do. Now, what is this I exactly? And how does it keep forming again and again? So in the yoga philosophy, in the understanding of the world and the individual, here we are in the middle of the world, and we experience the world through our senses. When we experience this world, the experience goes in and is processed in the mind, which is known as manas. In that process of unpacking all of our experiences, that unpacked experience, we attach that very innocently to become the I. Ahankara is known as the I maker. This is that part of the mind. This is the part of ourselves which takes all the experiences going on in our world, processes it, and makes it about me. So this is why when there is a world event going on, when there's something else going on in the world, it feels very personal to us. It may have nothing to do with us, but we take all of that and make it to be about me. Either that I'm glad that's not happening to me, or I wish this didn't happen to others, because imagine if I were in that place. So you see, everything centers around me, the I. And this then informs the intellect. The buddhi means the intellect. So the intellect is what makes choices. So the choices come from the intellect, but the intellect is driven by the I. The I is being informed by the mind, which is taking in the experiences and making it all about me. Okay, so this is what is going on in the subconscious mind, and this is the I that yoga is talking about. Neuroscience tells us that I decides everything else, just like yoga tells us. So here we have the world, the way the world is. We take in this data in pure sensory stimulus of sound, form, taste, whatever, through our sensory organs. That goes into the mind, where there is a superimposition of that me narrative based on these safe or unsafe neurohormonal pathways that I just showed you. And what happens here is this becomes the narrative. So here is the data, and this is what we are making of this data. This narrative is based on my own neurohormonal pathways, which then I project onto the world. You see, the world is now being superimposed by my own mask of me, of how I am. And the world appears to be the way it is because of the way I am. So the I decides. Everything else is what neuroscience tells us, what psychology tells us, which yoga tells us. Now, what is the difference between yoga and other modalities of working on this? Well, I like to look at it as very simplistically the understanding of what am I doing? What is my action in the world? How am I doing it? How am I interacting with the world? How am I doing anything that I am doing? And finally, why am I doing that? So it goes down in these layers. What am I doing? How am I doing this? But wait, why am I even doing this? Like, why this? Why like this? And when I come to these kinds of questions, I'll come down to why, but wait, how does this refer to me? So, what is the I? What am I? How is this me determining what I'm doing in the world and how I'm doing it and why am I doing it? So, this is the purpose of yoga, which does not stop at doing something. So, yoga is not prescriptive for saying, stop doing that and do something else. That is just a very superficial way of looking at yoga. Okay, so you may be running for exercise and now suddenly you're doing yoga. That has only changed the what. Now you start doing yoga and then you start refining your technique. So you're changing your how. But then at some point, you have to come back and ask, why am I doing this in the first place? Now, you may have been a runner and now you are doing yoga asanas, but fundamentally, why are you doing either of them? What does that say about you? If you don't go all the way down, then it's not really yoga. You see, it's just another fitness activity. And you haven't touched the purpose of yoga without these fundamental questions, because yoga is meant to change the fabric of the I. So it is meant to change the what, it is meant to change the how, but primarily it is meant to change the why. And this is the difference between the body, working with the body, which is at the level of the what, working with the how, which is at the level of the mind, and changing the why, which is the gut. The primal instinct needs to change, because this fabric of what I am, if this does not change, then it really won't matter what I'm doing or how I'm doing it according to yoga. Because what I do, remember, comes from who I am. So if I change who I am, then the what will automatically change. It's an inside out path. So in all of yoga, the tantras, particularly this particular tantra, the Malini Vijayottara Tantra, says, Tarko Yogangam Uttamam. So of all the limbs of yoga, which is asana, pranayama, yama, niyama, if you take all the different 8 limbs of, for instance, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, Patanjali's Yoga, the Ashtanga Yoga, Malini Vijayottara Tantra says, of all the limbs, perfected reasoning is the highest limb of yoga. What is perfected reasoning? Perfected reasoning is the ability to go from the what to the how to the why to the I. The perfected reasoning is a systematic way of going in from one to the other through cultivation of this mindfulness, of awareness, of this very non-attached, very refined discernment that goes into, okay, I'm doing this and I'm doing this because of this. Because it gives me validation. Because this is how I want to be seen. And so through absolute honesty with oneself, with absolute integrity with oneself, you go from one step to the other, and that is known as perfected reasoning or tarka. So the Renegade Method is an algorithmic approach to this what, the how, and the why using a tool that I've developed called the Renegade Map. So what are you doing? The first idea is, what are you doing? And in this, what are you doing? What am I doing? We use the teachings of the uh, yoga philosophy, of Vedanta philosophy, to understand what are the different areas of my life where I am expressing my purpose, what I want to achieve from my life, how I want to achieve it. And the Renegade Map is a huge part of the Renegade Method, where we have these exercises to go into understanding your fundamental purpose in life. What makes you tick and why? And then we go on to working on awareness of the vrittis and the workings of the limbic system that make you want what you want. You see, are you wanting that because that's cool? Are you wanting that because that's expected of you? Or is it something you really want? And then we systematically apply tarka, perfected reasoning, through various techniques to uncover these vrittis formed by this traumatic life experiences in the unconscious part of the mind, in the subconscious part of the mind, through this very specific way of mining the subconscious mind, of going into those vrittis, uncovering them, and bringing them up, and then working on them in this perfected reasoning, in tarka, for refinement and distillation of those things from the Renegade Map, the what and the how. So we keep refining, distilling by saying, okay, this is what I want, and then go into, why do I want that? What does that say about the I? And then working on that and bringing up all these ancient memories, these ancient vrittis that are driving us, and refining those, and working on those, and clearing those, and understanding them, and allowing them to dissolve through the light of awareness. Which then what happens is a miraculous thing happens, as I've observed in my life and the life of others, is as soon as those very things that are making us seek what we want or what we think we want start to dissolve, then we start to manifest our real stuff, the real things, the genuine, the authentic desires that we really want to manifest. And a lot of times, what we want, we cannot manifest because we carry conflicting desires. We want this, but we don't want the things that come with it. And so naturally, we can't manifest that at all. So why don't we want these things that come with that? What is the fear there? What is the block there? And those are the things that we go into in the subconscious mind. And what we realize when we work with the Renegade Map is, as we go in and do this work, we come back to the Renegade Map and we realize, wait, this thing that I wanted, I don't want that at all. Actually, what I want is completely different. It's completely different than what I thought I wanted. And so you come into alignment with your I, not the I that was created by the vrittis, but the I that is free of the vrittis. And this is where that internal alchemy happens, where this I that was formed by the vrittis is now converted into the I that is free of the vrittis. And that's when this starts to radiate into all those spheres of your life, the relationships, the purpose, the communication, the joy, the enjoyment of life, the sweetness and the music of the universe can suddenly start to manifest into our lives. And that's the goal of yoga. So the question that I'm going to ask you is, are you really seeking what yoga is promising? Because yoga is not promising a fit body. It's not promising a whole bunch of techniques that, have no meaning if we have not mined into the what, the how, and the why, and then the I that is the driving all of it. What I have realized is most of us come to the path of yoga because there are so many things in our lives that we haven't found a solution for. We haven't been able to go into those repressed emotions, those repressed vrittis, and solve them. So we come to these kinds of paths to find a solution that will make us feel better, that will keep us safe. But that's not what yoga is promising. Yoga is saying you can go beyond that. But to go beyond that, you have to first go through it. And what is so interesting in my personal experience of seeing people is that people who come to these spiritual paths and they say they want this or the other thing, once their life problems start to solve, they no longer want whatever is being promised, the highest states and so on. It's less important than having solved all these problems. So the first order of business, even according to yoga, is to resolve these blocks in your life. Start to manifest the authentic desires, and then come into the real yoga, which is the understanding of what I am in relation to this cosmos, in relation to all of life, in relation to this pulsing beat of awareness that I am in this vast, vast universe. So this is what I'm going to leave you with, which is, if what is being promised in yoga is what you're seeking, then self-enquiry is one of the most, it is not one of the most, it is the most important limb. As Malini Vijayottara Tantra says, Tarko Yogankam Uttamam. So I will stop here and see if you have any questions. Thank you so much for your attention.